In so many ways, this war has become a drone war. Drones used for surveillance, for reconnaissance, and yes, for dropping bombs on targets. We've been given special access to some of the drones that the Ukrainians have managed to capture from the Russians. And this is the Mahadja. It's a huge drone. It flies at thousands of feet up in the air, and it's made by the Iranians. Now, Tehran has denied supplying drones specifically to Russia to fight in this war, but there's a manufacture date on this particular device, and it says February 2022. Of course, that was the month that the war began. Now, these fly at very high altitudes, like I said, to drop payloads from above. They've managed to go through all the components. They've taken inventories here of everything that was found on board. 76 of the parts were made in the United States, of 14 American companies. But I do want to show you over here. This is the first time anyone's been able to see these. This is the much smaller Shahid drone. There are two here. There's one slightly larger one, which can hold something like 40 kilos of explosives. This is the smaller 20 kilos of explosives. But these are devastating because these have been nicknamed the kamikaze drones. These are the drones that fly often in swarms, up to 12 of them at once, which fly over a target and then fly directly into them. And they've been causing devastation across this country.
So that's an interesting report, and I don't know what you guys keyed in on, but the thing that I keyed on most was Iran sourcing 76 parts for those drones from US companies, specifically 14 US companies. Now, he doesn't name the company specifically, but it's just kind of a shocking scenario. But we need to put it into context here. Iran has a very sophisticated and sweeping sanctions evasion technique and underground black market system developed. They've had to do this for about 40 years. Honestly, it all starts in one specific area. They developed clandestine banking and financial systems to handle tens of billions of dollars in annual trade that are banned under US-led sanctions. So they still are able to find ways to buy things under the US or European or even UN sanctions regimes here. And this is why I'm saying it's not that the US is directly selling or providing this stuff to Iran per se. It's more to do with the fact that they likely are sourcing it in a clandestine manner. I'm certain that Tehran is teaching Moscow how to replicate its sanctions evasions, specifically in the illicit financial architecture, as well as procuring necessary technology and weaponry, etc. I mean, those two countries are overtly training because they just don't care about sanctions. I mean, what are they going to get sanctioned more at this point? They both are pretty heavily sanctioned. Of course they could, but they see the benefit more in just keeping the trade between the two open rather than kowtowing to US and European and even UN demands. Now, the combination of Russian and Iranian expertise in this area could produce the world's most sophisticated and expansive sanctions evasion and black market network ever in the history of the world. And it's funny because their central banks, which are generally supposed to be the bastion of stability and a solid foundation for rules-based systems. That's why countries will do business with other banks, with other central banks. But the central bank of Iran, and now we're starting to see the central bank in Russia out of Moscow, is playing a leading role in managing a lot of illicit activities. The central bank of Iran conducts illicit funds transfers to terrorist organizations such as Hamas and Hezbollah and other proxies that they support. Russia's doing the same. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, when she was in office, labeled Iran the central banker of terrorism, and there's a lot of truth to that. So again, like I said, even though the report kind of said that they are sourced out of the U.S., a lot of people I think are understanding that it's likely not the U.S. selling Iran. It's normal stuff. They are using back channel deals, and often Iran will use gold or a series of currency conversions to get the money that the seller demands. The problem for Iran is that businesses all over the world rarely want to be paid in Iranian rials. The US has clamped down pretty heavily, and the Iranian currency has taken a nosedive. And the U.S. isn't necessarily inept here. It actually forces other countries that trade with the U.S. to limit their gold transactions with countries like Iran to ensure there's less sanctions evasion. Basically, you get caught trading with Iran to evade sanctions, you may not be able to trade with the U.S., and that's a devastating prospect for many nations. Turkey is one of those countries that have completely shut off all major forms of trade with Iran because they need to have access to the U.S. banking sector far more than they need goods trade, specifically in things like food, with Iran. So the U.S. control of sanctions here is so powerful, it doesn't actually even allow countries to do business with Iran in Iranian rials, which is the currency of Iran. So if you're caught conducting business with Iran using Iranian rials, you could face punishment from the U.S. And many, many, many countries abide by this. So instead, Iran uses, like I said, a series of multiple conversions through multiple countries to get the seller the money they want. So in addition, Iran created business fronts to conduct illicit activities. On paper, there were 16 companies registered to the 15th floor office tower suite of a building in Hong Kong, and they just looked like normal companies. Some of them were called True Honor Holdings, Alpha Effort Limited, etc. But after a series of investigations by the U.S. Treasury, it came to light that these were front companies for the Islamic Republic, and it was creating attempts to evade U.S. sanctions for Iran. And these go back, they were discovering a lot of these companies go back even to 2011, where they were trying to develop their missile program, and these countries were fronts for it. And for years, U.S. officials poured over the financial records and intelligence intercepts to track down these firms, but it's not easy. I mean, Iran generally relies on countries like Iraq and Lebanon and Afghanistan and Syria to get what it needs. That was during the major sanctions when China and Russia was playing ball. That's not so much the case anymore. Iranian oil has its own black market as well. China, India, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and Turkey agreed to stop purchasing Iranian oil, and Iran was forced to store its unsold oil under the radar of U.S. officials in tankers offshore, and then try to discreetly make sales to other countries. Iran has turned off GPS transponders to block tracking of its oil tankers, and also changed the names of its ships. It uses flags of other countries at its wish. It just kind of throws up a different flag, and then it registers companies in these ships. They register these ships in these front companies, and these are all tactics they actually learned from Venezuela. And it's likely that much of the tech in these drones was funneled from Russia or China. And it's not necessarily military tech. It could be microchips that were repurposed or other repurposed U.S. equipment. In 2015, Russia ended its self-imposed sanctions and likely began funneling U.S. material to Iran. And China can't be trusted, even though on paper they say they are continuing sanctions against Iran. But they may be involved as well, mainly as a big FU to the United States and Europe, who they are not a fan of being global bullies, according to them, on the world stage. So I don't believe, again, this is U.S. tech getting into Iranian hands by legitimate methods. It's more likely that it came from other countries through a series of back-channel deals or directly from Russia or under the radar of the U.S. sanctions watchers coming out of China. So very fascinating here, and we can likely see a lot more of this as Russia continues to be held to many, many sanctions, and Russia and Iran will learn from each other, North Korea as well.